All right. Great. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Canada Careers Podcast. Let's get fired up today to discuss breaking into the world of data privacy with our host, Gurleen, and our guest, Jessica Ojiaku. Canada Careers Conversation was created to help you navigate your career. We here are bringing networking coffee chats right to your computers or wherever you get your podcast. So welcome, Jessica. Thank you for joining us on this
Having
Saturday morning. We can start off with the first question that we have for you here today. So the mainstream sentiment about breaking into the field of data privacy is that if you want to kick off a successful career in data privacy, it's super important to think about a mix of traditional backgrounds that can really help you get a grip on the ins and outs of this field. A lot of people tend to come from areas like law or computer science that kind of give them that edge, so to say. What would you say to people who believe this and take it as a blocker to their dreams or their goals of getting into data privacy?
I think that's a really great question to start off with, and it definitely a topic. Very much. We're starting off, we're hitting hard right off the get-go. I guess I would say is coming from those backgrounds will definitely give you, an advantage or an edge in the job market. I wouldn't say that those are the only backgrounds that are highly sought after by employers. At this point, especially, what you're seeing in cyber as well as data privacy is that there's such a huge demand for people in privacy, a huge demand for people in cyber. And I think now it's almost making companies have to kind of rethink their strategy in terms of who are the candidates that they would go after normally and who are they now going to consider that they may not have necessarily considered in the past. And I would definitely say, as someone who didn't come from a law background, didn't come from a computer science background, I'm one of those people who was able to kind of navigate the industry and say, you know what, like I have something unique that I can offer. And I have this curiosity and willingness to learn, and I'm inspired and passionate by the field. And I think that's enough for me to at least get my foot through the door. And then it's on my work ethic and, the continuous learning that kind of keeps me in the privacy.
Right. And is there when you get into any kind of organization, do they is there a lot of continuous learning throughout it, or is there
I would say there's a good amount of continuous learning. I think obviously it depends, like if we contextualize this a little bit. I was someone who came from like a very digital health focused background. And I was going into consulting, where consulting, oftentimes you're working across industries. So you could be working in financial services one week, then oil and gas the next. So there was a lot of learning just for me to kind of get ramped up in terms of, the industry specific intricacies, specific to those industries. And then now adding on top of that, I was also trying to learn privacy. I think that's kind of one of the appeals of data privacy is that you're always learning if you want to, because laws are always changing. There's always new trends. There's always, new things happening in the industry that make it exciting and appealing for those who don't necessarily want to be in a career where things kind of stay stagnant throughout their career.
So for millennials or people like myself who want to keep the job exciting, this is definitely a field to look into.
Absolutely. I would definitely say that.
Well, especially like the whole data dynamic is changing so rapidly. It trickles down to the law aspects as well, saying what's okay, what's not okay. And then you combine all that with an ever evolving field and you get a mix of every day is different. Oh my God, I'm living that life. Well, it's not for that life. Some people like stability and routine.
Exactly. Well, I think it's all about I think the first step almost is kind of introspecting with yourself and reflecting on your own career and your own personality and saying what do I like? What do I enjoy? And then from there saying okay, if I'm someone who likes the stability, doesn't like constant change, maybe this isn't necessarily the field for me. Or maybe, certain environments might appeal to me more than other environments, maybe working in the public sector rather than working in the private sector, but still also being in privacy. So those are some considerations.
That's a good call out. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to go on to the next question here. So if one were to apprentice under a data privacy leader, what would they likely gain in terms of skills, competencies, and capabilities that will empower them to tackle future challenges with confidence and creativity?
Also, another hard-hitting question. I thought about this for a little bit. So some things that immediately come to mind is like negotiation and influencing skills. As a privacy professional, oftentimes, the business is coming to you with a challenge or a problem or a project, and sometimes they want to do things the compliant way, but sometimes they're nervous about coming to you. So a lot of the role is really like you'll develop skills around how do you influence the business? How do you influence people in marketing, finance, HR to think privacy should also be up top of mind when you're trying to explore these different projects that you're doing. In addition to that, I would definitely say that communication and collaboration are some huge skills that you will develop as a privacy professional. A lot, depending on how collaborative the work environment is, you may be working with product, you may be working with engineering, you may be working with IT, you may be working with cybersecurity, you may be working with legal. So you're constantly having to kind of put on different hats almost and work with these different areas of the business. Of course, as you can imagine, privacy is very like legal in nature. I always say that to people. So kind of like that regulatory and legal knowledge that may not necessarily come to some people who don't come from a legal background. I definitely think that that's a skill or competency that you'll develop pursuing privacy as well. If you're working under someone or working in a team that's more technical, so for instance, working around privacy engineers or working around more cybersecurity folks, then I think there's also an opportunity for you to develop like very deep technical knowledge, which can help you in the sense that maybe you want to branch out into something a lot more technical, like becoming a privacy engineer, or maybe you want to kind of spin out of privacy and explore something more in the cybersecurity realm of things. So that that's like another area I would say like you could definitely develop in. And then I think like we spoke about earlier, kind of is around continuous learning. You're always learning. If you want to, like there's always going to be a textbook. There's always going to be a new law. There's always going to be a new policy out there. So there's always opportunities for you to kind of brush up your skill set and kind of expand on your knowledge base.
And kind of growing off that continuous learning, just a off-base question. For people like me and Gurleen who are like HR, if we wanted to switch into data privacy, is there a certain course or anything that you would recommend that we take?
I love and hate this question because it's tough. I get this question a lot, and that's why I'm like sensitive question. I would say, like as we're all in Canada, the Certified Information Privacy Professional Canada certification is a very common certification that a lot of businesses will look for. And usually, like organizations will say, if you don't have the certification, we expect you to get it within the first 6 months. For example. But I also like to be on the other, like I like to kind of play devil's advocate and say, on the other side of things, I think there's an opportunity to, create an attractive profile of yourself without necessarily having certifications, but showing that you have a willingness to get those certifications if you get the right sponsorship from the organization that's trying to bring. And the reason why I kind of like, these certifications aren't cheap and they're time consuming. And I think it's a lot for someone to take on that commitment without necessarily being in the field already. And I also see that certifications don't guarantee a spot in privacy, unfortunately. So it's kind of one of those, like, you really kind of have to weigh the pros and the cons of whether or not it makes sense to pursue a certification before actually getting into privacy.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm going to move on to our next question. If you had to create a Pinterest dedicated to a data privacy career, considering the various events and conferences that shape this field, what would be some of the boards that you would curate and pin?
I'll tell you the complex of the question, Jessica, because we're almost inundated with events, conferences, news articles, and it's almost rampant on LinkedIn, right? So somebody just starting out, for them to know what are the credible sources or where can they get maximum value out of their time, and participation is really what we're going after. We're trying to cut through the noise and say what your pin look like.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really good context. Thank you for sharing that. So I guess starting off, like as a Canadian, obviously, I immediately think of the International Association of Privacy Professionals Canadian Privacy Symposium. So typically it happens like May or June of each year. And I think that's a really great event to one, not only network and meet a bunch of privacy pros in one space. And it's an event that's, explicitly dedicated to Canadian privacy, where I find like other events are either more global or they have more of like an American focus. So this is a really great spot for Canadians who are interested in privacy to network, to learn. A lot of new topics come up at these symposiums. You get to kind of get a taste and feel of like all these different organizations that have privacy teams and kind of what are the privacy challenges that they're facing. So that's one that I immediately comes to mind. When I think of also like the IAPP, but another event that I think of is their Global Privacy Summit that usually happens in Washington. And I think it happens in like April, each year. I haven't been to that one, but I know a lot of people go to that one on a yearly basis. And I've heard really great things. Again, similarly, you're probably hearing a lot of some of the biggest privacy challenges that are happening globally. If you're someone who wants to expand your network from a global perspective, I think that's a really great conference to think about. For me, of course, like as a Black woman, there's not many Black people in the data privacy space, at least that I know of. So I've recently learned of a few conferences that happen in the US that are kind of strategically curated for Black tech professionals. And I've noticed that some of these conferences also include some talks on cybersecurity and data privacy. So the two of them that I've been watching very closely are Afrotech, as well as Render ATL, which happens in Atlanta every year. And Afrotech this year is happening in Houston. So I'm actually excited because I'll be attending Afrotech this year for the first time.
Very cool.
And, just excited to kind of learn more, kind of just be in a space where you can feel the sense of community because you don't always get that in your day to day. And lastly, I would say the other events that I've really enjoyed are the Women in Security and Privacy networking events and workshops. So Women in Security and Privacy is a nonprofit organization, if I remember correctly. And essentially, they are trying to create a community for women in the space. And they have events. So they have chapters all across the world, actually. I think there's chapters in Europe as well as North America. And the Toronto chapter has done a really great job of just curating events where women can come, learn about privacy, learn about security. They've collaborated with different organizations, Latinas in tech. And it's just been a really great opportunity to not only expand my knowledge base, but also meet other women who are very passionate about this field as well.
No, that's some great resources, I feel like. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to have you.
Yeah. I was sort of thinking that. I was like, well, maybe I should go and attend one. Just to explore.
Okay. There's a lot of people, but I'll try to narrow the list down just for the sake of time. I immediately think of Debbie Reynolds. She's based in the US. She's known as the Data Diva, and she is the founder and CEO of her own consulting firm. And like I mentioned earlier, I don't see a lot of Black female representation in privacy and cybersecurity. So when I immediately came across her profile, I just had like this like bolt of excitement because I was like, wow, like I can see myself in her. This is someone I can aspire to be like one day. So I just find the work she does is very inspiring and just really great from a representation standpoint. In addition to Debbie, I also really enjoy Jay Averett. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. And he is a senior privacy product manager / privacy engineer for Microsoft, also based in the US. And what I like about him is that he shares just a lot of very like thought-provoking posts on LinkedIn that kind of just make you take a step back and say like, oh, well, like I didn't see things that way. Like, let me save this for another day when I need to consider it. And I also just find the advice he shares is just very practical. So I've just really appreciated that. Another person I think of is Michael. I'm going to butcher his last name. I feel so bad. Sorry if you see this. Michael Clohissy. He's a sports attorney. And why I'm drawn to him is because he's one of the very few people I can think of who talks about the intersection of sports, privacy, data, and law And it's an area that, like, I'll be honest, if I wasn't like in the health privacy space, it'd probably be an area that I would explore in my own career. So it's just
Yeah.
really refreshing to see his content on LinkedIn. And, I really just like gravitate towards it really naturally because I'm a huge sports fan. So anything sports related, I'm always like jumping on it. So like the fact that there's someone working at the intersection of sports and have been able to like almost embed their love for sports into their career, I think that's really aspirational. So I find that really inspiring. So that's another person. And I guess the last person I would say is Mary Marwig. Um, and there's something just so like organic and authentic about her energy. I don't know how to explain it. Like when she posts videos of her talking, like almost angelic. Like you're just drawn to her content. And I just love the way she interacts with people in our privacy community. And I find that she really breaks down privacy news in a way that's very digestible for readers. Because I think um, privacy can be very overwhelming for those who aren't in privacy because it's
Yeah.
a lot of legal jargon and technical jargon. So to have someone who's there kind of simplifying everything to say, like, I want this to be applicable and digestible by anyone, regardless of what background you're coming from. I really appreciate that. Top 3 skills. I guess this ties back to like our previous discussion. I think communication is a really strong like soft skill to have. Being able to communicate both in writing and verbally, and I think that can help someone.
So important.
Yeah, like regardless of what field of work they get into, being able to, knowing that like talking to a child is very different to talking to an elderly man, to talking to a very technical engineer, to talking to a very legal lawyer. Being able to kind of shift how you convey messages based on your audience, I think that's a really great skill set to have. One that maybe people probably don't think of is like being creative. So creativity is another thing. Oftentimes as a privacy professional, you get thrown these challenges and a lot of times you kind of have to be a little creative because no two challenges are really ever the same. Sometimes there's different types of data being involved. Sometimes there's different types of organizations involved. And I feel like that's where the creativity comes in. In addition to that, a lot of what we do is training the business. And I think that's where your creativity can really shine through to say, like, what's an interesting way or creative way that I can teach someone about privacy that's not going to put them to sleep. So,
Yeah.
and then a third skill set or skill rather, I think, of course, like legal analysis, as boring as that sounds, boring, but as tough as that sounds, being able to kind of look at privacy law and analyze it, digest it, and then again, that kind of ties with communication, being able to communicate that law back to your business in a way that's digestible to them. I think that's a really strong skill to have. And I think it's almost imperative to succeed in the privacy.
That you mentioned creativity, because I feel like somebody looking at the privacy field might feel like it's dichotomous. Like, how can I be creative with something that's written word, like written law? What can I do there? But there are avenues to be creative in that and see how you want to kind of present it. How do you want to break it down? Where do you want to apply what? So that was a pretty interesting nugget. I often wonder, can people really cultivate creativity, or is that something you're kind of? Is it a function of nature or nurture? Is like
I think there's a lot of people who naturally are creative and, they're just blessed with that skill of being very creative, but I think it can be taught to a certain degree. Of course there has to be kind of that willingness to learn on that person's end to say like, I'm not very creative right now, but I'm willing to kind of, whether it's pick up a paintbrush and learn how to paint. But I think there's opportunities for people to kind of develop their creativity skills. And I think as you develop more expertise and knowledge in whatever field you're in, it's easier to become more and more creative because now you can say like, okay, option A is not necessarily going to work, but let me propose an option B and propose an option C. So, I definitely
you're out of the survival mode, I think.
Exactly.
You're down. And now you're like, okay, an experiment.
Yeah.
Understood. Yeah, I think that's a good piece of advice. I also heard you mention the representation of women in cyber and Black women in cyber, or Black professionals in cyber as well. You've been in this field now long enough to kind of have a view on some of the very evident or even non-evident barriers. What would you say are, the top priorities for organizations to help break them down? And what can they, or an organization that comes to mind where you're like, they're doing it really well, and other organizations should take a note of it, like good job almost.
Yeah. Wow, that's a loaded question as well. These are tough questions. I would say, like, one, like, prioritizing diversity and inclusion. Like, I think what we're seeing now, especially with a lot of the news that's happened over the last, let's say, 6 months or so, it's almost being deprioritized, unfortunately. And I think when it was
Yes.
prioritized, that was like a huge green flag or a huge moment of excitement for people who come from backgrounds or visible minorities who weren't necessarily being given opportunities prior to organizations prioritizing DEI.
Mm.
So I would say, like, kind of embedding DEI practices into your hiring, thinking like, like, how can we increase diversity? Whether it's, uh, yeah, through hiring or through the events we sponsor or the events that we send some of our employees to go and represent our organization, just to say like, hey, I who work at, company A, we value diversity. We appreciate diversity. That's why we're showing up to this event for Asian professionals. We're showing up to this event for Black professionals. We're showing up for the Latinx community and, making ourselves visible to say like, we welcome you at our organization. In terms of like an organization I can think who's doing it well, I can't think of any like right off the top of my bat. And that's not to say
Yeah.
that people aren't doing it well. It's just like, I don't really have much visibility
Yeah.
into that.
Yeah.
But I would say like, yeah, like just what I pay attention kind of to the organizations that are constantly showing up for certain communities. And it definitely speaks volumes. And then hearing from people who work at work at those organizations as well, and hearing about their experiences to say, like, it's not just them showing up to these conferences, they're also backing that up with the way they treat us internally once we're hired. So I think it's all about kind of that whole pipeline and that whole like employee experience or candidate experience. Um, Trying to weave in your love and appreciation for diversity, as well as kind of keeping that same energy throughout that person's
Yeah.
journey. So it doesn't necessarily stop after the hiring.
Yeah. I know of some of the hiring practices where when I was coming up in the field of recruitment, they had a practice of like having a diverse team member also be a part of the interview panel, maybe
Mhm.
somebody visible minority, and really having that lens so that some of the experiences that the diverse professional was sharing was also received in the same
Yeah.
same way, like almost at the same wavelength. And they were able to then bring it back to the team and say, this is why, and this is what, and we've also experienced it. And so I thought that was a practical way of implementing the AI within the hiring practice, like very practical way where you could say, okay, well, this is great. This is how you do it. Another one
Absolutely.
that you just mentioned is going to the events that matter to you and letting them know, like, you're ready to engage with that talent, and that you have ecosystems within your organizations that will help support that transition. Or there are employee resource groups as well within an organization. I think that's a great place as well, I feel. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All great points. Thanks so much, Jessica.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm gonna hit stop.